Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephanie Moore-Lotridge. I'm an assistant professor of orthopedic surgery at Vanderbilt University Medical School in Nashville, Tennessee. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share our work with you today, entitled Leveraging Generative AI as a Way to Build an Interactive Escape Game for Biochemistry Education for our first-year medical students. Where I want to start today is with our version of medical education in the United States. Specifically, one of our goals during the first year of medical school at our institution is to pass a large amount of foundational science knowledge to our students that we hope they're going to integrate into their clinical training in the future, with the hope that they are going to then use this foundational science to improve health outcomes in their patients. One way we do this is through the use of active learning. Now, numerous studies have demonstrated that active learning is highly effective in medical education because it helps students to integrate material, helps to improve retention, deepen their understanding, but also allows them to work on teamwork, communication, and interpersonal skills, which are important for their clinical training in the future. And so one question we have is, how can we facilitate active learning in the biochemistry curriculum? And how can we do this as faculty with limited resources and time available to us? And so today I'm going to talk about how we're utilizing generative AI to help assist in the design and implementation of active learning strategies, specifically by building an escape game. And so I'm going to go through 6 steps that we followed to build this escape game for our medical school curriculum, specifically designing the learning objectives and course content, followed by exploring different puzzle types, constructing those puzzles for the escape game, followed by establishing a story framework, then conducting a small group pilot, refining our materials, and then going on to roll out the full escape game. And specifically, I'm going to talk about how we are going to utilize generative AI at 3 of these steps by using it to explore puzzle types, constructing puzzles, as well as establishing that story framework. And to start off today, where we want to start is establishing the learning objectives and course content that is going to be needed to be tested. So we want to ask ourselves, what are the key elements we want to review as part of our escape game? And therefore, this will help us determine what content we want to test with puzzles. And so specifically, we wanted to test about key lipid species, GPCR classification, pharmacology terminology, GPCR pathways, pathophysiology, and receptor tyrosine kinase pathways. And we used then AI to help us explore different puzzle types that we could use. And so as many of you in this audience have generated escape games, sometimes one of the hardest part can be determining what type of puzzles to make. And so one of the first things we did is go to ChatGPT and ask it to give us some puzzles that could be used as part of an escape game for higher education. And what it came back with was things like logic puzzles that many of you are familiar with, where students have to place events in a chronological order or sequence, things such as ciphers and codes, and this could be a biochemical sequence or medical terminology, math and data puzzles where they had to interpret charts or data tables, physical manipulation puzzles where they actually had to physically work with a model or board to build that puzzle and get the content, as well as matching and categorization, where students had to match terms and definitions together, riddles and wordplay, as well as collaborative challenges, such that the students had to collect pieces of a puzzle over time that would make sense later on when used together. And ultimately, our goal was in our escape room in each puzzle step to use a combination of these different puzzle types in order to keep the students engaged throughout. And so now that we've used AI to explore some puzzle types and help us build some creativity, we then went on to constructing those puzzles. And what you'll see here is the content we wanted to be tested with the different puzzle types used. And what you're going to see is that we use a combination of puzzle types for every different piece of content. I'm going to show you some of those examples and how we generated them. So the first puzzle I want to show you guys is how we tested for key lipids. And this was a grid that we created where students received these cards that were all cut apart and mixed up. And the students had to then take these cards and put them in order from the riddle on the left-hand side, the structure in the middle, and then the name. And so this was an example of a matching puzzle as well as a riddles, and those riddles were all generated by use of AI. And then when they put them in order of 1 through 5, if they looked in the corners, what they got was a code that spelled out the word plasma membrane. And so this was the code ultimately that they had to use in an escape room to come and tell me as a facilitator to get on to the next stage of the game. Another example of a puzzle we built was a GPCR pathway, where students receive this printout, and what you can see is that different areas of the pathway are blocked out, and the students had to work together to fill in the blanks from the key you see below, and then that key gave them a code, and that code was ligand. And so this is an example of a sequence of events puzzle, as well as a hidden message. Another example was when we did GPCR classifications, is that this was a categorization puzzle where students had to take the coins and put them into the appropriate jars, and this would generate a 3-digit code. And what you see here is that this would generate the code 535, which then was given to me, the facilitator in the room. And finally, an example I wanted to show you is how we tested pathophysiology. And this used a couple of different online generators. One was an online crossword generator, as well as utilizing AI to help generate clues below. And then what I did is I highlighted different boxes that would spell out the word receptor when they unscrambled it. So this is an example of a crossword puzzle along with riddles and a hidden message. And so once we were able to construct these different puzzles that tested our different course content, we then needed to establish a story framework. And as many of you who have made escape games know, that this can be sometimes one of the most difficult elements. And so this is another example of where we use generative AI to help us. And specifically, I went to first ChatGPT and I said, hey, I'm designing an escape game for medical students and I would like help illustrating it. Can you give me some potential themes? And some of the themes that I came back commonly with were things like a forgotten lab theme, a hospital blackout, and the clinical trial sabotage. Now, because I am a researcher by past training, I went with the forgotten lab, and specifically this was where a legendary biochemist had vanished, leaving behind cryptic notes in a forgotten lab. And so with this foundation, we then put this storyline into ChatGPT and used it to help expand it out. And specifically, what it gave us is that you and your team of medical professionals are attending a prestigious conference, and during this event, you hear rumors of an old hospital that was once led by the brilliant but mysterious Dr. Vera Sinclair. Her work promised to revolutionize medicine, but the hospital was abruptly shut down and the research was lost. With this foundation, we then used this storyline and copied it into DALL-E, which is an image generator, to generate images that would go along with our storyline, specifically like the ones you see here. Once we had generated this first image in our storyline, we then used this process reiteratively in order to generate more of the story and images to go along with it that we could then combine with our puzzles into a slide deck in order to generate our escape game experience for the students. And so now that we had established our story framework and our puzzles together, we next conducted a pilot with older students. Specifically, I recruited 3 third-year medical students, and so this would be 3 out of 4 years has been completed. And I asked them to go through the escape game for both proofreading, timing, and any logic and confusion that they experienced. Once this was completed, we then refined it based on their feedback and ultimately then rolled it out to the students. And what we found from working with the students, as well as reflections from our team, is that for prep time, ultimately it took about 15 hours, including pilot testing, to develop this escape game. And this was done by one faculty member. In the room, all we needed to conduct this in person was the use of one facilitator, a printed slide deck per group, and ultimately we had 12 groups, 4 key cards that the groups collected throughout to complete their final puzzle, and then we did give them treats at the end when they escaped the room. We tested this in 80 first-year medical students that were in groups of 4 to 8 students, and all students were able to escape the room by the 50-minute mark. Optional feedback from students, what we collected, was largely positive, that they enjoyed the activity, enjoyed the escape room. They had a high rating for engagement and enjoyment of the activity. They found it was of moderate difficulty, and they appreciated that this activity highlighted the collaborative nature of their group, and they appreciated this. And so thinking about going forward, some reflections I had is that I do want to create a digital version in the future to save on printing. And this would also allow it to be conducted asynchronously if a student wasn't available to be in class. Finally, from the student feedback, I'm also considering either increasing the difficulty of the puzzles or considering 2 different difficulty modes, such as one that could be done in class and one that could be conducted out of class at a higher difficulty for review. Also, from looking just organically how groups developed, we also want to use a mandatory smaller group size, such as having 4 students, so that each student is contributing more in the future. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any and all questions. My email is here. Please reach out with any questions. Also happy to share any of our materials we've generated if they're helpful to you and your colleagues. Thank you so much.